Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre, I'm your bookworm, book dragon, whatever you want to call me. And today we have another book review of this tiny little book, which it isn't actually that tiny, it's quite the chunky. It just looks tiny here. But if you're curious, if you haven't seen the thumbnail, the book is The Rise of Endymion by Simmons. Today I feel like holding the microphone instead of having it attached to my shirt, so we're gonna go with this. But before we jump into the review, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and if you're new, comment away. Have you read this series, or did you just happen to jump into this channel because you thought it might be good? Let me know, I'm curious. But yeah, let's jump into this book, because I know that we haven't spoken about science fiction in a while. I mean, we speak way less than we should, because I feel like I need to read more science fiction, but for some reason there's always so many more fantasy books to read. But anyways, The Rise of Endymion is the last book of the Hyperion Cantos. It was written by Simmons. The Hyperion Cantos has 4 books, which are Hyperion, The Fall of Hyperion, Endymion, and then this last one, which is The Rise of Endymion. This is an epic space opera science fiction novel, and I've reviewed all the 3 previous books. I've read them, I love them. Check the reviews out, the thumbnails are around, you have the cards to click through, but it's just a small spoiler, they are amazing. This specific book, The Rise of Endymion, was published in 1997, and at the time it was nominated for a lot of awards. It won some of them, like the Locus Award for Science Fiction, and on Goodreads, this book, of time of recording of this video, has over 58,000 ratings, almost reaching 59,000, which, by the way, I don't think it's that many. This book is, for me, should be a very strong classic, so it should definitely be read by many. It's underrated or underhyped more, but yeah. And the average score it has is a 4.17 out of 5, which again, it isn't the best score, but we know that science fiction always tends to have lower scores. But let's see if my score is inflated, deflated, if it's around the same thing. Let's find that out. But I mean, just as a reference, this is the lowest score the whole series has gotten. The scores have ranged from 4.17 to 4.27, so it's quite consistent, and I think my reviews throughout the series show that. But now let's get to the housekeeping items. You know the drill. First, I'm going to read the synopsis for you. If you don't want to hear anything, especially because this is the last book, there might be a lot of spoilers, just jump into the timestamp. You'll skip all of that and you'll jump right into the nitty-gritty of the review. Otherwise, stick around and you'll hear me narrate it. The time of reckoning has arrived. As a final genocidal crusade threatens to enslave humanity forever, a new messiah has come of age. She is Ania, and she has undergone a strange apprenticeship to those known as the Others. Now, her protector, Raoul Endymion, one-time shepherd and convicted murderer, must help her deliver her startling message to her growing army of disciples. But first, they must embark on a final spectacular mission to discover the underlying meaning of the universe itself. They have been followed on their journey by the mysterious Shrike, monster, angel, killing machine, who is about to reveal the long-held secret of its origin and purpose. And on the planet of Hyperion, where the story first began, the final revelation will be delivered. An apocalyptic message that unlocks the secrets of existence and the fate of humankind in the galaxy. Okay, now with the synopsis out of the way, let's look at the scores for the previous books in the series. And as you can see, like I said, it was quite consistent. The range of scores, the scores range from 4.4 to 4.8. So it's a very short window. They're all very good scores, so you can see already that I loved the series based off of this. And I mean, even the small things that I had to point out in The Fall of Hyperion, they weren't that major. They didn't make me not like the book. It was just like, these small things, if they had improved slightly, it would have made the book even better. So you can understand the level of quality this series has already. How will this installment fare? Let's find out. And we're starting with plot. As I've mentioned in the previous reviews for this series, and for the ones that don't know, this series is actually kind of split into 2 arcs. You have Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion, and then you have Endymion and the Rise of Endymion, which is a story that happens a couple of centuries after the events of Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion. However, they are connected. There are characters that show up in both arcs, And I mean, the consequences of what happened in the first two books definitely carries on for the last two books. But in this second arc, let's say, we mostly follow Endymion and his adventures or his journey throughout the universe. And whilst there was a lot of setup in the previous book, in the book named Endymion, and we got to see Endymion go in his adventure, there was a lot of that adventure and action involved in that book. And whilst in this book we still see some of those adventures, Endymion still goes into that type of adventure, I feel like it lost some steam, it lost a bit of the spark it had in the previous book. Maybe because we had already seen it, so it felt a bit repetitive. Towards the end, things got heaps better with the exposure of all the secrets and all the plot twists being revealed. Definitely elevated the plot. I think the ending was done masterfully. It was beautiful with all the expectations met in the right way. I think for me, it was quite hard not to compare this book with the other book I was reading at the time, which was The Dragon of Jin Sayang, and see how these two endings couldn't be any more different, where one was just everything just pieced out together to form this beautiful image, and the other one seemed like it was trying to force pieces that didn't fit together, and it was just trying to force us to like something that didn't end up being good. So for this category, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5 because okay, that the start, it was a bit slow and it wasn't a bit as engaging as the previous ones, but the ending definitely made up for it and it was really, really good. Our second category is characters, and I think then Simmons did a really good job for us to connect with Endymion, our main protagonist. And of course, to a lesser extent, to the other characters that are quite important as well, as Ania, Abatic, and Federica de Soya. In fact, one of my criticisms from the previous book was that Ania felt a bit too abstract for me, almost this godly entity that I couldn't really understand, and therefore I was having troubles connecting with her and caring about her. Even though she was human and she was almost like a child, it also had that duality, so it was hard for me to connect. But in this book, while she still maintained that prophetic nature, that mysticism about her, I think she became more human as well and more relatable, and especially because her relationship with Endymion flourished even more and you were able to connect to her through Endymion. I felt like it was an improvement. And of course, aside from that, we have all the struggles, all the desires and adventures that Endymion goes through that make up a lot of the character development that was supposed to happen with this character, especially when we reach the point where we see Endymion in the present, because this second arc is kind of him retelling everything that happened, and eventually we get to the point of the present where he is writing that story. And that point is quite pivotal, and you definitely see a huge growth in that moment to go into the final arc of the story. I think there were great characters and great character concepts introduced in this book, so for me this category, 5 out of 5, no doubt. Moving on to world building, I loved the ideas that Dan Simmons introduced and developed in this book, and overall in the whole series. I think so many concepts from both the duologies and from specifically the third book reached their apex in this one, in the fourth book. And that led to an expansion of the knowledge we had, but also so many questions and answered, so many mysteries, and it felt like the whole universe was expanding as well, and there was so much more to explore now. And the amazing part of it is that everything felt coherent. It wasn't like he was breaking any rules. Everything had been set up properly so that this revelation made complete sense, and it wasn't breaking any rules of this universe. Okay, that some parts were a bit more fantastic than scientific, let's say, but like I said, I think they all made sense considering everything that Dan Simmons had introduced prior to this book. The grounds had been set up for the fantasy to be able to stand on itself and not break our sense of belief in the story. Without going very deeply into the story and into spoilers, but learning the language of the dead and the living, hearing the music of the stars, all of those made a lot more sense once they were revealed to be what they were. And I think they also helped develop the characters in a certain way. So they kind of synergize together to move the story forward. So I think for this masterful work, it's going to be a 5 out of 5 as well. Our next category is writing style, and I think throughout this series, Dan Simmons has been able to maintain a level of prose that is worth reading just for itself. I think it achieves a really good balance between the pacing that has levels of action and calm periods that allow the reader to breathe, but also it has descriptive prose without being too dense. And the locations he describes, that they look fantastical, but at the same time, they are so well described that I almost feel like I'm there. And I definitely feel like I want to visit those places. And of course, with that trope of the character being in a certain situation once the book starts and he's just retelling us everything that happens, that automatically creates a certain tension because you know that eventually the character will reach that point. So you're always expecting to see when that will happen, and that can lead to a lot of tension and mystery that can easily manipulate the reader. And I think Dan Simmons was able to manipulate it in a very smart way, gentle, not forceful into making us feel tense or feel that mystery that is forced. So it was really well done, basically. And for that, I'm also going to give a 5 out of 5. And last but not least, we have our category of enjoyment. Interestingly enough, I think this was the book I struggled the most to finish out of the 4 books. And not that it was a huge struggle. I didn't feel like I was struggling reading it per se. It wasn't like, oh, it's hard, it's super dense, or there's not much action, none of that. But if I had to say a period where I struggled the most, I would have to say it was more or less between 20 and 40%. And that's probably because it was where it resembled the most the previous book in terms of plot, of the adventures that Endymion was going to. Or maybe it's because the stakes didn't feel so high. I can't really pinpoint the reason why. But what I know is that both before and after that period, I was loving the book. And of course, towards the end, like I said, from that point where we reached the present, from that point onwards, or maybe even a bit before, I definitely felt that I needed to read all in one go, and I was like non-stopping. And I enjoyed the ending. It was so satisfying, especially because, again, I was reading another book and I wasn't enjoying that one, so this one felt even sweeter. So I think overall, I enjoyed this book to a point where I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 because the exciting parts definitely outweighed the slow parts. But I cannot give it a 5 because of that 20 or 15% of the book where my enjoyment wasn't that high. But so we reached the end of our review. Just as a refresher, we have the scores for all books, but basically I gave a 4 for plot, 5 for character, 5 for world building, 5 for writing style, and 4 for enjoyment, which gives us a score of 4.6 out of 5. So overall, this book is not the worst of the series, but also not the best one. I think it's definitely a very powerful ending of the whole series. It ended quite well with really good quality. But in my opinion, I think Dan Simmons excels at introducing concepts and introducing a universe and expanding that universe at the start. So my favorite books were Hyperion, definitely, but also Endymion, because both of them we were starting a new world almost, and they were really exciting parts. But nonetheless, if I were to average the score of the 4 books, we would end up with a final score of 4.65 out of 5 across 4 books. So that's really good for a series. A score like this, for me, it's a series that I would recommend all the time to my friends, and I do actually. I think that this series is a really good sci-fi series to be read. So yeah, I recommend maybe you read it as well. Just don't forget, this is 2 duologies in the end. So maybe you can read the first 2 books, see how you feel about it, and then if you like it, read the next 2, but know that they will be a bit different in style. But let me know, have you read these books? Have you not? Comment down below. And if you're new, don't forget, subscribe, like the content, and you'll be seeing me on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon.